Welcome back. Russia is threatening Poland and the Baltics, claiming that they would be, quote, the first to suffer if a direct conflict between Russia and NATO breaks out. This follows Russia's deadly attack on Ukraine over the weekend. Poland's foreign minister telling reporters on Monday, quote, I hope that President Trump and his administration see that the leader of Russia is mocking their goodwill, and I hope the right decisions are taken. Joining me now is the mayor of Warsaw, Poland, Rafal Trzaskowski, with me right now. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. Good morning.
What would be the right response to what we saw over the weekend? What is Poland's position at this point?
We have to stay strong and we have to deter Russia and Putin. We've done our job in Poland because we've invested heavily in our defense and our defense capabilities within NATO. We are spending 5% of our GDP on defense. We are buying equipment also from the Americans. We are securing our border, and that's what we need to do. We need to strengthen the NATO and North Atlantic Alliance. And we need to do one more thing, because President Trump is absolutely right, that the Europeans have to take the responsibility and spend more money on defense. And we need to convince them, and that's what Poland is doing, to treat the threat seriously and spend more. And I would make it my mission, if I were to be elected president, to convince countries such as Spain or Italy or the Netherlands to spend at least 3% of their GDP on defense, because we need to strengthen our European capabilities within NATO to deter successfully Russia and others who want to threaten us.
Yes, this is a very good point. And of course, the United States and Poland have had a long and historic relationship. We have spoken with President Duda many times when he was in the United States to meet with President Trump. This is critical to both countries and the world. Mr. Mayor, what do you want to say about the relationship in President Trump's second term? Can you assess it for us? And what do you want to say to the United States in this moment of stress?
Well, first of all, we are allies. We're very, very close. Poland is one of the most pro-American countries in the world, and we have been allies. When 9/11 happened, of course, NATO used Article 5, and we were the first. Poland was the first to actually send our troops to Iraq, even though some other European countries were not doing that. We sent our troops to Afghanistan. We were fighting arm in arm with our American friends. We sent almost 30,000 troops altogether. So we are one of the closest allies of America. We are also buying American equipment. We are, of course, stationing American troops on our soil, and we are building this very very capable and effective missile defense system. I think that the most important thing is that we need to stay strong. We need to stay very close, Europe and America, because only when we are together, then we can really deter all of the countries who wants to attack us or even threaten to attack us. This is really, really important, and that's why I think that we need to hear what President Trump is saying. We need to convince other Europeans to treat security seriously, to also share part of that burden, and strengthen the transatlantic alliance as much as we can, because every crazy dictator in the world is watching. And if we are going to be strong, and if you're going to project power, then we are going to be much safer.
Yeah, and particularly now at this moment of stress and upset and potential issues with Germany. I mean, the issue of migration is just as much of an issue in Poland as we've seen the issue up to the forefront in America. This issue of contention between the countries is migration. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, everyone has to understand that what we see on our eastern border is now a hybrid warfare, which is waged by Russia and Belarus against Poland and against Europe, because they're trying to destabilize us. They're bringing migrants from all over the world, and they're trying to tell them that they would cross the border into Europe. Now, we've secured the border. I mean, now the border, our eastern border, and also the eastern border of the North Atlantic Alliance and of the European Union, is one of the most secure borders in the world, because we need to show the right signal to the Russians and to the others that we are not going to let any immigrants cross the border. We are not going to allow anyone to destabilize us. We need to be very strong on that.
Let me get your take on the upcoming presidential election next month. Voters are going to the polls May 18th. Mr. Mayor, you are a candidate in this election. You're leading in recent polls. What do you want to say to the people of Poland? What is your agenda?
Well, of course, I mean, the most important thing is security. And I want to say that I have a plan. I mean, first of all, we need to invest more in our defense capabilities. We need to convince Europe to do the same. We need to have the best possible relationship with the United States of America, but also strengthen our European capabilities within NATO. We need to do both. And we need to also talk to our American friends and try to convince them that whatever happens, and I know that President Trump wants peace, we cannot allow Putin to present the end of this conflict as his win, because he will try to do that. And then every country in the world who wishes ill to the United States or to Europe will use that, and they will try to interpret that as our weakness. So we have to remain strong, because, I mean, the bad guys only understand the language of power and the language that, of course, the American president is exuding. That's the most important thing. And we need to stay united. When we are united, when we collaborate, also when it comes to trade, then we are strong, and our enemies have to think twice before doing anything unpredictable to the United States of America or to Europe.
So what about trade and the president's tariffs in America? The EU negotiating right now with President Trump on the level of tariffs. And I believe President Trump would like to see more sales of oil and gas from America to the European Union, Poland included, as opposed to this market underground of Russia selling oil across the world.
And absolutely, we're on the same page with President Trump on that. First of all, I interpret the fact that, you know, President Trump opened this conversation about tariffs as an opening bid. I think that we should simply sit at the table and try to have as good a relationship as we can when it comes to trade, because we're crucial partners. Poland, for example, buys a lot of American equipment in the defense sector, and not only in the defense sector, welcomes American investment. So there's a lot of synergy that we can attain, and that's what we should do. And yes, you're absolutely right that some countries, some companies are actually going around sanctions and buying Russian gas. What we need to do now is to buy, of course, gas from America. We are doing it through our LNG harbor, and we need to do more in order to be absolutely independent of Russia when it comes to fossil fuels. That would strengthen our energy security, and that will also strengthen our security overall. We just need to be as close as possible. And when it comes to trade, we need the best trade relationship with the United States, which is going to benefit, of course, both sides.
All right, we'll be watching all of that. Rafal, we appreciate you joining us so close to the election. We'll be watching. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.